Right now, in thousands of small American downtowns, there's one particular kind of building standing empty. Tall glass display windows, an old sign, faded but still readable if you squint, and almost nobody under 40 walking past has any idea what actually went on inside. At its peak, this single type of store employed hundreds of thousands of Americans, anchored the main street of practically every town in the country, and sold you everything, from a hot lunch to a parakeet to a wedding ring, all under one roof, for pocket change. And then, over roughly 2 decades, nearly all of them closed. Not a slow fade. They shut down, one after another, in a wave that most people alive today never got to see, because by the time they were old enough to notice, the buildings had already become something else, or nothing at all. So what was inside these stores? Why did practically every American town, even the smallest, eventually end up with one? And what actually killed a business model that lasted nearly 100 years and seemed, right up until the very end, absolutely unstoppable? Grab a cup of tea, subscribe to the channel, and let's dig in. It all started with a single word written on a storefront. 5 cents. Woolworth opened his first successful store in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. In 1879, the entire business model rested on an idea that was genuinely radical for its time. Every item in the store cost exactly 5 cents and was laid out openly on tables where customers could pick it up and examine it themselves, instead of asking a clerk behind the counter to fetch each thing one at a time. It was such a sharp break from ordinary retail that other shopkeepers initially figured the whole thing would go bust within months. It didn't. Within 10 years, similar stores using the same pricing trick were opening in towns all across the country. The price eventually had to go up, but the name stuck anyway. By the 1910s, rising costs made a strict 5-cent price flat out impossible, and the stores expanded into a 5 and 10 cent structure, and then further still. But the nickname, 5 and dime, had already locked itself permanently into the American language and never let go, even decades later when a store like that was selling televisions, furniture, and full hot meals for far more than 10 cents. One chain grew to more than 2,000 locations across the country. It was Woolworth's that became one of the largest retail operations in American history. At its peak, it ran more than 2,000 stores in the United States alone, making it one of the country's biggest employers for a significant stretch of the 20th century and a notable presence on the New York Stock Exchange, one of the founding companies of the Dow Jones Index itself. The lunch counter became a genuine social institution. Nearly every sizable 5 and dime had its own lunch counter, a long row of stools facing the cooking area, serving simple cheap food, hot sandwiches, milkshakes, and coffee refilled without end. That counter often became the real community center of an entire small town, a place where you ran into people you knew, caught up on local news, and spent an hour that had nothing to do with shopping at all. This is where the American civil rights movement forced the country to a reckoning. The Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, became the site of one of the most significant events of the civil rights era. In 1960, 4 black college students sat down at a whites-only counter and refused to leave, sparking a wave of similar sit-in protests across the country that directly forced chains like Woolworth's to desegregate their lunch counters within a matter of months. You could buy almost literally anything here, all under one roof. A well-stocked 5 and dime carried a genuinely staggering range for its size: sewing supplies, toys, greeting cards, aquarium fish and birds, records, cosmetics, hardware, loose candy from open bins, and eventually small household appliances, all laid out on open tables deliberately arranged to encourage leisurely browsing and impulse buys rather than a targeted trip for one specific thing. Loose candy was weighed by hand right at the register. One of the most vividly remembered details of these stores was the candy counter. Rows of open glass or metal bins full of loose candy that got scooped up by hand into a little paper bag and weighed on a scale right at the register. That experience shaped an entire generation of American kids' first real understanding of what you could actually buy for a nickel or a dime. In small towns there was often exactly one such store, and everyone knew precisely where it was. Unlike modern retail chains competing head-to-head in the same town, the 5 and dime in a small American community often operated with no local competitors of its kind at all, remaining a genuinely one-of-a-kind landmark whose location any resident could name without thinking, usually right on the main shopping street. These stores raised an entire generation of future retail executives. The operational model honed inside these stores, open displays, self-service, centralized purchasing for an entire large chain, became a real school for retail management techniques that later shaped the whole structure of the modern American big box store. Several executives who went on to build or lead major American retail chains directly credited their early start inside five and dime stores as the foundation of everything they built later. A second major chain built an entire empire on the same blueprint. Kresge's, founded on roughly the same basic model as Woolworth's, eventually grew into its own enormous national chain, and in 1962 launched a new, larger store format under a completely new name, a decision that would define the remaining 20th century of American retail far more powerfully than the original five and dime concept ever managed to. That new format was called Kmart. The original Kresge chain used its retail experience, an already established supply system, to launch Kmart specifically as a larger discount self-service store, and in a remarkably short time this new format started eating away at the very small five and dime stores that had funded its creation in the first place. The same scenario played out across the industry. Chain after chain launched larger discount competitors, drawing on exactly the same retail know-how. Suburban shopping malls pulled shoppers off Main Street entirely. Starting in the 1950s and accelerating sharply through the 60s and 70s, the physical center of American retail shifted dramatically away from the main streets of small towns, where the five and dimes had always stood, toward enclosed suburban malls built around large anchor department stores. This drained foot traffic away from central shopping districts at a speed that many small-town five and dimes simply couldn't survive. Discount superstores finished what the malls had started. Chains like Walmart, founded in 1962, the very same year as Kmart, offered a genuinely wider selection at genuinely lower prices under one enormous roof, directly undercutting the exact value proposition that had made five and dimes successful for nearly 100 years. Cheap, convenient, everything under one roof, except now at a scale the original five and dime format could never have reached. Woolworths itself closed its very last American five and dime in 1997. After nearly 118 years of continuous operation, the company that started the entire five and dime concept in America shut down its remaining traditional retail stores, fully pivoting the business toward a sporting goods retail chain it had quietly been building for several years, a chain most people today simply know as Foot Locker. With virtually no direct connection to the original five and dime concept the whole company had been built on. A small number of independent five and dimes are somehow still hanging on. Scattered across a handful of small American towns, a genuinely tiny number of independent five and dime stores have survived to the present day, some run by the third or fourth generation of a single family, deliberately preserving the same open bins of loose candy and the old-fashioned service model. They now operate less as an ordinary retail necessity than as a real, conscious act of local memory keeping, the very last physical link connecting us to a kind of store that once existed, in one form or another, in practically every town in America. If you ever really did buy something at a store like this, or if one is still standing in your hometown, drop a comment and tell us what you remember picking up there. And if this is the first you're hearing about any of it, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel. Subscribe if you want more history exactly like this. There's plenty more of it ahead.